And hello, welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. It always makes me so happy seeing everyone checking in from all over the world. It's great. We have a really global community. Today, I'm happy to be joined by Bruno, and we're going to be talking about controller binding enhancements for MVC and API, correct?
Perfect.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm excited about that, partly because I feel like we haven't had a show on MVC and API controllers for a while. So it's exciting to hear about that. Cool. Well, I'm going to jump into the community spotlights. We've got just a few at the beginning. And so I'll share those out in the chat. And then I've also got a banner here, and they will be, if you're watching later, they're in the description on the show in YouTube. All right, so let's dig right in. So first of all, we have here, I'll switch to this view. So first of all, we have, mostly this is a roll-up of a bunch of release posts lately. Just I'm trying to keep up with them all. So this is a new one on .NET 7 Preview 3. Some cool things in there, including one thing I noticed was ASP.NET Core startup time improvements. So that's down here down the list. And a thing I thought was interesting on this is it can result 10 to 15% faster startup time. However, the team does test against things. There's the Fortunes benchmark, which is in Tech Empower, and then they also test against Orchard and some other scenarios. And so they're watching regressions on that and continuing to work on those. So that is some cool stuff. Okay, new one here, C# 11 preview updates. So some cool things in there. One that I noticed that I'm excited about is this raw string literals. So the idea here is you can use, zoomed in too much there, triple quotes. So you can use a triple quote code fence. And then within that, you can kind of put whatever you want. And so that's nice. You can still use string interpolation inside of that. And so that's definitely handy for cases where you've got just a big block of text and you don't want to have to go through and escape every individual quote or something. So that's pretty neat. Some other things on UTF-8 string literals and working with things like span. And then one thing to pay attention to here is they removed parameter null checking in C# 11. So this was just based on community feedback. It was also based on as they worked with it, discussed internal to the team. So they had originally had a syntax that had 2 exclamation points at the end of the parameter name, and have decided that, not to use that. And so they're still recommending using argument null exception throw if null, which was introduced in .NET 6. So, that's an example too of things where we're definitely at that point in the cycle where we're sharing early previews, and this is the time where you can give your feedback, let us know what works for you, what you like and dislike, and this is the time in the cycle where we can make changes. All right, EF7 Preview 3. Some of the things that jumped out at me was controlling DB context using T4 templates. So they talked about, how to use these T4 templates to control how you want to do things like initialize and handle nulls. And they have a very, active community stand-up as well. So you can watch their stand-up demo and you can see demos of that. .NET MAUI RC is out. So that means it is with a go live license. So when we go through and we do previews, those are we're not going to stop you from deploying them to production, but when we go to the RC phase, then it includes a go live license, meaning it's supported in production. So this has all the information on how to do that. So that's exciting stuff, getting very close to release. Got a few recent posts. I wanted to share this one here. This is the ASP.NET Core .NET 7 Preview 2, and that was partly where this is what prompted me to ping Bruno. I think this mentioned some things about controller action and controller binding stuff in there. And then we also had another one that just came out with preview 3 as well. So, and here are things like binding to TryParse and stuff. So I didn't bother to read through this in detail because I figured I would just make Bruno teach me all about it. So one post that I thought stood out to me from the community that helped me kind of put this all together is a post from Andrew Locke on keeping up with stuff. So, here's, he's talking about, look, there's all these posts that have come out. And he just mentioned ways that he kind of keeps up to date with things. So there's the .NET Conf recent videos from November. Documentation, we put a lot of work into the docs to try and keep those up to date, as well as including things like migrations and changes between them. So, here talks about like differences when they were introduced, which preview and which RC. And then he links to several different community links and talks about the previews. One other thing that's helpful to me also is following the GitHub repos. And I subscribe to repos and I just watch for those. I'll get email notifications and things as they come out. And then you can, if you really want to get nerdy, you can look at API diffs and stuff too. So, and another one from Andrew this past week was different ways of running JavaScript in a .NET app using JavaScript Engine Switcher. So we've had some different ones in the past on here. We had Sebastian Ross talked about Gent one time, I believe. And there's some other different things that will run JavaScript engines inside of C# and .NET applications. So he goes through and compares several different ones. And then he talks about using the JavaScript Engine Switcher, which allows, it's kind of a wrapper on top of that. So using this wrapper package, you can switch between them, and then goes into a case study as well. So one other one, I mentioned following repos and just keeping an eye on them. And one that I've been following lately, and I'm sure we'll do a show on this soon, but this ASP.NET Core Open API package. So this is based on, so somebody's asking for links. I believe I still have them here. I'll share them out again. So this is talking about moving from inferring things from metadata and moving to instead, I think there's an implementation farther down the list like this. And so the idea here is declaring this .with Open API, and then that can be, that'll be included in your Open API description. So I saw this was just merged, which is exciting. We'll have to get them on to show it off. And that's all I've got. So, okay, Bruno. So can you introduce yourself? You're relatively new to the team, correct?
Exactly. Hello, everyone. I see everyone from around the world. I see someone from Brazil. That's where I'm from. So it's very excited to be here for the first time. I'm Bruno. I'm a software engineer in the ASP.NET team. I've been in Microsoft for 7 or 8 years, but just joined to the ASP.NET team maybe 5 or 6 months ago. So I'm pretty new to the team yet. So we're still learning everything, but we have a lot of things that we did, and I'd like to show to everyone.
Cool. Okay. You ready for me to share your screen?
Anytime.
All right, here we go.
Okay, so as John just said, we don't have a MVC API controller talk for a while, both because I think we are very focused on making minimal API release and also make it better and better, but we still try to make API controllers better and better, and that's what I'd like to show you here. One thing that we decide is try to align the API frameworks, minimal API and MVC, or at least align the create some feature priority in MVC to get everything that we learn from the minimal API implementation, if it's possible to bring to MVC to make the user experience better. So you'll see most of the items that we will discuss here will be very similar that what we have in minimal, and we decide to make it available in controllers, because we will see that it will be a clean code and will be more easier to when we try to move from one framework to another. And so it's a demonstration that we will still work on the controller. Of course, minimal APIs is our focus right now. We are make it better. Don't just show the Microsoft to Open API. You'll be part of the minimal metadata self-description that we are working on. So everything's focused on minimal, but we still have controllers to make it better and faster, and you'll see. Okay, so what I like to show, I think, is 5 or 6 new features. The cool thing that we have now, we are in preview 3. We'll, I think, next month, or I don't know exactly the timeline, we'll ship preview 4, but we'll have at least one new feature for each preview for MVC API controllers. That's cool. And I will start with one that I work on. I'd like to start with showing the issue for you guys. So one thing that we try to do is try to make the things more clear, or at least more consistent. And we have a behavior in all our bind source. Bind sources are just the way that, or from where MVC or API controllers will bind your values or your parameters. So we have behavior where we have a default value. It means the parameter is optional. It's working for almost all the bind source except for from body. So in .NET 6, I will show you. If you have a simple API, let's say we have a to-do API, and we would like to try to make a post. I think it's something, yeah. You try to make a post, and just return a created in some location, and return the content of this object. So it's very simple. When we call this API, I have my API request here. I can add whatever I want in my data. So when I do request, okay, it's perfect. It says 201, it's created, and I have my data here. But imagine a situation where I'd like to make this parameter optional. So what it's expected is, okay, I'll make my type nullable, and just add a default value to it. That should work. Not exactly. It should, but not. Oh, so let me show you. So if I have a new request, I just to go back here, I have a operational template, pattern template. So we have my different requests were all here. And in this case, I provide a 0 content length, and my content type is application of JSON. And I send an empty body. So what I expect is, okay, because I accept nullable, accepting as a default value, we should get whatever my API response. When I hit the send, I'll get this exactly this error. Okay, it says, okay, it's nullable, but doesn't matter. I'm expecting required empty body. I require no empty body. That's not exactly what we are looking for. In .NET 6, you can work around this issue for sure, and you have 2 options. So the first one is you can do in your parameter, you can say it's from body, and also say empty body behavior, and what's the empty body behavior that you like to do. It's ugly, but it works. So when let me build this application, and I will basically add empty body as allow. It says, okay, now it doesn't matter if it's nullable or not, but I will now start accepting empty bodies. So we don't need to we could provide a content length at 0, and it will be accepted. So if you hit the send again, now we have the same behavior as we have before. So we have 201 created, and of course, because my body is empty, my response is also empty because I'm using the same response. Okay, another option in .NET 6, we can go to your program CS and configure your API, your MVC options. And the MVC options, you have the allow antibody true. I love the autocomplete because make the presentation much faster and easier, and don't need to type everything. So now basically I don't need to add anything in my controller. I can go here and remove it, but that means all the APIs will have the same behavior. So
we got a question here that I was thinking to myself is why would you want to use an empty body in a post?
yeah, that's a good question, and depends your application. In my example, I say I just create a to do, and I say if the to do is empty, I would like to create a default to do to the user, the current authenticated user. So
Okay.
it'll be a kind of a ID, next ID, and the title will be a default or something like that that you can edit later. But it depends on exactly what the application will look like.
So using you maybe default to use a default value or something.
Yeah, exactly. And, or I don't know, we'll have a application that will have some information comes from query string, and you would like to add a search that will add additional metadata to the search or tags or things like that. They are come from body, and we decide to okay, it's allowed to be empty or null.
Okay.
Yeah. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So yeah, I will just rebuild. So in this case, all the APIs will have the same behavior. So now we'll allow empty body for every API in our application. That's not exactly what we look for. So one more thing in .NET 6 that's a little bit weird because it's a bug at the end. We'll fix in .NET 7. So imagine a situation where it doesn't matter if you have allowed or not allowed, but you have your API, and your client is calling your API and not provide the content length. So we have an empty body and it's HTTP2, content length is not there. So, and if I hit send, my expectation as a developer or a user is the same behavior as an empty, because it's just an empty request. Mm-hmm. Not exactly what's happened. So when it's happened, when we receive this request, basically we are not interpreting the content length header correctly, and we are blocking the request not because the validation, but because the model binding will fail to serialize the JSON because it's so that one complete wrong behavior that we fix in .NET 7. So let me show .NET 7 how it works. So I have here .NET 7, same code, exactly same parameters. And now what we do is, because we specify default value is nullable, we now infer that you also accept empty body. That means if you receive a null value, it's accepted. If you receive an empty request, it also accepted, because I think that what we expected in this situation.
Yeah.
So if I go here, I have my Postman, I have an environment called .NET 7, and do the same request, and it works as expected. And we also fix the no content 0. In this case, we are changing because the older code is just a verification if the content length is there, and if it's 0. Mm-hmm. Actually, not checking if it's there, it only checks if it's 0. That's the problem. And now we are using a feature that's used across Castro, and all the other parts of the framework, that we check if we are able to read the body or not. that has a more advanced logic to detect this content length, or it's a HTTP2, HTTP1, so have a different logic. So in this case, now it doesn't matter if you have a content length, he'll detect that the bar is not there. That means we are saying the empty request, and we don't, if you are accepting, we are good to go. And the same will happen in this case, going back to the original post. In this case, if you are sending an empty body with no content length in .NET 6, it will fail with the serialization exception. And now we'll say, okay, you're not able to send a no empty. You need to send a no empty request for me. So that's the first feature that I'd like to show you. Any questions?
Nice. Yeah. No, that makes sense to me, and I think we took the one good question about that.
Yeah, great. So let's improve our to-do app a little bit. And okay, I still have my post here, my to-do, and as normal, what we used to do is just add some validation. So I'd like my titles to be required, my ID. Imagine not coming from the sequencing database. I need to specify ID. This ID needs to be at least number 1, cannot be 0. So I have my to-do now. I have the assigned to and created by. And for both, you have a person class that requires a name. So it's very common to have all these validation constraints. And I also include some JSON property name that say, okay, instead of ID, because it's an implementation detail, I'd like my JSON to be just I. Or same for assign to, I'd like my JSON to be just to do. And same for created by and name. Okay. Why I'm showing this I think not in .NET 6, but since .NET 3.1. I think this issue is since 2018 or 2017. It was there, and we decided to fix it finally. I'm glad that we fixed it. So when you have a request, I show you an example in the issue. I hope it's big enough. So when you have a request in this example, we generate a model state dictionary as part of the problem details JSON format. And one thing that the issue that we always have in ASP.NET Core is instead of showing the JSON serialization property name that we ask for, we are reporting back the internal or implementation detail. So what we did is make it work, and now I'll show the difference. So for the user perspective, no change at all. So no change at all in the future. I will show what we are doing in the next preview 3 and what we do in the next preview. So let's show example. So I have my to-do tool here. I'm saying the same request, ID and title. But as we see, now I have the assigned to, I have the created by, and both need a name. And also I have the ID constraint that says it should be at least 1. So when I hit the button in .NET 6, you say, okay, it's bad request. We have one or more validation errors. That's perfect. That says, okay, the ID actually is not ID, it's I. Yes, the ID field must be between 1 and 200. Okay, this number, the max value. And created by should be required, and site 2 should be required. Okay, great. And let me create a new created by. That what it's asking me to do.
Yeah, you're following what the
error message
is telling you, right?
Yeah, and say, okay, test. It keeps saying created by.
Yeah.
That's great. So basically in .NET 7, what we are right now we have in preview 3 that we shipped, I think last week, is in your configuration, you can add a new MVC option that says, okay, I'd like to add an additional model binder validation provider, metadata provider that will read the information and use as part of the validation message. So if you go here, your programming.cs, and I'm just configuring the MVC options, we can do the same when we call the add controllers. And what I do here is just say options model metadata details providers. Just say add, and I will say, okay, I'd like to add the system text.json metadata provider. This is the current behavior in .NET 7 Preview 3.
Okay.
And we are planning to make it different. And this new model metadata validator, metadata provider, will be added as default, and will only affect API controllers. It will not affect MVC controllers. But for now, that's what we have. In the future, we don't need to add anything. You'll just be there for you. And if you need to go back to the preview behavior, you can always say remove type and select the type that we like to remove.
Okay.
Okay.
This is interesting that you're showing here because in a way it's fixing a bug, but you don't want to break somebody that was kind of relying on that behavior before, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you have to be really kind of careful about the way you switch that over.
Exactly. And one implementation, this is that we took the first was when this provider is there, it will change how the display name, it's the display name value. If you add to a MVC application, we have views and or razor page, and we are using the validation message to show to users, it will have a different value. So that's why we not add it at first as a default behavior. And in the future, we'll only make it available in API controllers. That's exactly where it should be, because it's a problem details that will be a part of the APIs, not the MVC controllers.
Okay.
Okay. So let me add that hit F5. F5 in ASP.NET 7 project. Okay, so now I have a new version of my application and switch to .NET 7, and not magic, just exactly what I expect. Now I have the I, to, and owner, and I can say, okay, now I know that should be to and should be owner. And so the serialization and the validation will work, be in sync now.
This is especially useful when you're providing an API and somebody else is consuming it and they're relying on your error messages to help them figure out what's wrong. So.
Exactly. And one scenario that the issue came was for single page applications, because we have JavaScript and it's case sensitive. And you imagine a situation where because you have the JSON serializer, say it's a camel case, and even if you don't have the proper name, it's a camel case, and when you get the message back, it's a Pascal case. So it's a simple change, but you make it crazy to you need to handle the text and change to upper or to lower to make it so it's compatible.
That makes sense. Had a few questions come in, and I think this one is asking about the previous one where you're showing about validating the null behavior, but presumably API controller will still pre-check model state is valid and abort with standard error codes if not.
Exactly. When you have the API controller attributes, we still have some conventions. And one of the conventions is basically we return the problem details and not secret break the request and not call the controller action because we just validated before.
Okay.
Different than, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, finish your sentence.
Different than MVC, when we will receive an invalid request, we need to check if the model state is valid and do whatever we want with your request.
Okay. I had a question about binding to records instead of classes.
Yeah, it's perfect. I have the binding in my first example as a record.
Oh, yeah.
And in this case, I have a class. So yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. That seems
Okay.
straightforward.
Okay. So let's move to the next one. Next one is a idea that minimal API came when it was available, and we decided to include the MVC. So in minimal API, we can bind similar as controllers. We can bind strings to different types, or you can bind a type that implement a TryParse method. And I will show an example of the TryParse method later. So basically, instead of handle these types as a complex type, because they have a TryParse type, we can just bind them from string and handle them, treat them as a simple type. So it'll be very different than a complex type. Well, when we talk about complex type, that means we need to bind every property, and a simple type is just create an object from string.
Okay.
Okay. So imagine I have a very unrelated to the to-do. It's a inventory controller that says, okay, I'd like to get the machine name, and part of my route, it says IP address. I need to pass the IP address. I don't know. I know it's not secure, but it's my API. I can do. I can do all. Okay. And as part of my code, I just create calling the parse of the API address, and API address implements the TryParse or a parse. And if it's a loopback, I reply back localhost, and I reply or custom machine name, whatever we want to do here. But just
So
to
your simple type is a string, and then you're actually validating and figuring it out. You're parsing it inside of the method itself.
That's perfect. Yeah, exactly. So if I call it, let me go back to the Postman and say, okay, get machine. I'll say localhost. It says localhost. You can change to whatever different. Oh, it's still localhost. Let me 92. Okay, let go. Okay, do not look back anymore. Simple enough. But imagine a situation where instead of binding to a string, I'd like to use my class that I have in my model and say this class comes from route instead of from, because in API controller, let me go back a little bit. If I do this in API controller as a convention, because the machine is a complex type, that's what .NET 6 understands as machine as a complex type. Let me show my machine is just my class that has a name, is loopback, and IP address, and in a TryParse that I'll explain later. So because it's a complex type, it says, okay, my expectation that this class comes from body. However, if you are using the itp get, we don't have body. You expect to have all the query strings or out. So if you try something like that, it will not work. And if you try something like from out, we have a complete weird behavior. Oh, let me go back. So I have my get machine here. It's a exactly the same request, v2. And as you can see here, I have my machine as a part of the bind. So sorry, I need to use .NET 6 because I show early. Okay, that's what we get.
Perfect.
So what happened? We will try to bind the API to the parameter because it's not a complex, a simple type. We will bind as a complex type. Will not. It will be null. And what the validation in MVC will do is, okay, now it's a complex type. I need to validate across all the properties of this type, and he starts getting to all the properties that I declare. And one property that I declare is just calling the isLoopback and use the address as a parameter. And in my case, because the address was never set, it's null, and it's a complete complete undiscovered error. This says, okay, now have a value cannot be null, and you say parameter address, but I never had an address in my API. What that means? So it's completely wrong because it's trying to bind my class as a complex type. That what's correct, but not in my situation that I look for.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's how it works in .NET 6. So in .NET 7, when we have a class or a type that define a TryParse API, so you can have two different TryParse. We have a TryParse with string and the out value, or string format provider or out value. And all, or in .NET 7, .NET 6 is a preview feature. .NET 7, I think, will be a final feature. It's a interface called iParsable. Basically, it's a new feature that .NET 7, .NET 6 introduced. It's called abstract. It's called, what's the name of it? It's a static abstract methods
Okay.
in interface. So it's an interface that we can implement a static method. So if you .NET 7, you can just go in iParsable and do machine. I'm in .NET 6 because that's why it's not working, but it will be implementation of this TryParse method, just to make it consistent. But we are doing using reflection. If you are implementing the interface or not, you'll behave the same. So in this case, I have a TryParse method that just get the IP address and do the work for me. Basically the same that I did here in my controller before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. So that's all. When you have this special API, now MVC understand now your type that we decide declaring that as a parameter is a simple type because it's a parsable type that we can do parse from string. And just going back how the MVC decides a complex type or not. The complex type in .NET 6 is only a simple type in .NET 6 is a type that has a convert from string available. And in .NET 7, now it's a type that has a converted from string available or a TryParse method available. So that's the difference in .NET 6 and .NET 7.
Okay, one thing I didn't understand, you showed putting an iParsable interface on, but then it wasn't working and you removed it. Is that just because it's not implemented yet, or is that?
In .NET 6, it's a preview feature. It's not enabled in my machine. In .NET 7, it's available, and I'm in a .NET 6 project right now.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so when you have this, I have the same APIs for .NET 7. I have this one here that says, okay, machine from route, and I don't need to specify from route anymore because one of the rules of the convention is if the no metadata attributes is specified, and if it's a complex type, it'll be from body. If it's a simple type and not part of any route, you'll be from query. If it's part of the route, you'll be from route. So in this case, because now it's a simple type and it's part of the route, it's inferred that your parameter now is from route. Okay. So I don't need to specify anything, but you can just do the same here from route if I need, or from query if not part of my route or whatever. Even from body, if you prefer to do from body as before. Okay.
Okay.
And in this case, my API will be just work because when we call the API, we have our TryParse method being used as part of the binding process. You run all our logic of TryParse and have the machine created, my instance of our machine created, and you can just use the name property here. Okay. So let me show you. Maybe I can actually debug if it's more clear. So now I have v2 and I have localhost. So as expected in my class I implement is loopback. It's a local host or custom machine. Basically the same logic that I have in my controller.
Mhm.
Okay. So
Nice.
that's a cool feature, and it works for custom types and also for types in the BCL in part of the framework.
Okay.
So imagine in this case, I have a IP address is loopback and doing a parse for IP address and use a string. If I'd like to skip this step and let the MVC do the work for me, I can just replace the string for IP address, and it will just work because IP address implement a TryParse method.
Okay. Which
Yeah.
is much better instead of writing your own custom code and doing your own parsing. Here you can declare what the type is, and I'm guessing too possibly you could have better like Swagger documentation or whatever too, because it knows what the type is. Then.
Exactly. One not one bad side of this change is because how the API controller convention works will now change the behaviors. Because imagine a situation, let's say I have a post machine name, and let me remove from here, and we are expecting this machine from body, and because now it's a simple type, you'll be inferred as a from query. So if you not change your code, you'll be a breaking change, and you need to now specify, let's say, this one specifically is from body. That will override the behavior. So in this case, we are not using the TryParse to do the model binding.
Okay.
And that's one decision that we made is not have any option available to disable this option. So it's on by default, but you can always specify the metadata and decide something different. But I'd like to hear feedback. I think we can post all the issues after the meeting and say, okay, give your feedback if you really break with this change and you prefer to have an option to say disable globally. We can always accept this feedback if it makes sense.
Okay. That's okay. So we had an interesting discussion come up. Dick was joking earlier about the null posting, and he was saying, well, at least it would be idempotent. And then we had somebody else ask about, can you explain what idempotent means? So, I mean, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, so let me try. I was actually just reading in a book this weekend that kind of clarified it pretty well in the case of like microcontrollers. But the idea with an idempotent, and correct me if I say this wrong, but idea with an idempotent interface or API method is that if you call it with the same input over and over, it will return the same response, and you can call it multiple times, and it's not going to like break or do something like. So for instance, if you say create with, these specific information in this ID, it's going to, you can call it multiple times and it's not going to create multiple things. Which is important for things like with messaging or with queues or those sorts of things where you need to be able to handle failures. You need to be able to recall an API and not have it break or do something different if you call it multiple times. Happy to hear somebody explain it better in the chat because I don't feel like I did that great a job.
You did great. That's great. Any other questions?
I didn't see any other questions. I think this is really helpful, and we can definitely add those issues to the chat. So, one other question I had is, how do you prioritize? How do you figure which of these things to include? Like with binding, is this based on customer input? Is this based on things that the teams wanted to fix? How do you?
Yeah, the previous issue that I mentioned, it's that part of the problem details that the response is wrong. I think I'm new to the team. I don't know the history, but for sure it's a bug that was there. And because we are very focused on the minimum API, we don't have time enough to fix it.
Okay.
But as soon as we ship minimum API and you were able to balance working API, minimum API and controllers, this one became our priority because it's a issue that a lot of people upvoting the issues. And I would say everyone that have an issue and you like to, okay, I'm totally break with this issue, go ahead to the GitHub and just do a upvote there. And we are always looking to those counts to see how the community is looking for this issue. So that's one scenario. And for all the others behavior, as I mentioned, I think I have here. I have a huge, it's called IAPI instead of issue, but where we decide to learn from the minimal actions and bring some experience to MVC. So almost all the work that I'm showing here is part of this group of issues.
This is something that I'm really happy to see because I do like that minimal APIs are easy to get started with. You can write something small with, but that grow up story is really important. And I've seen some people worried about it, that they don't want to, they don't want to start building a minimal API or teach people to build minimal APIs, and then they're going to have a 4,000 line, program.cs. And so this is really, like I'm going to have to dig into this in more detail as well. So this is showing how you can do things. And then I guess guidance or even analyzers to help refactor your code to that as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So I have two more items to show.
Cool.
This one is a very simple, and again, it's just how the minimal works and we bring to the MVC. And this one could be a little bit controversial because some people prefer to have ever binding sort metadata explicitly in our controller, like this one. So we have a service. It's just this one is just the weather forecast MVC template. So instead of have all the code as part of the controller, I create a service that do exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did is register the service as part of my GI container. So I say, okay, builder serves add singleton in my case, and what kind of other type I'd like to have the dependency injection controller. And what we can do in MVC, say, okay, I'd like to have a parameter that's my service, and this parameter will come from service. So the model bind will detect the attribute to say, okay, now this is from service. I need to check if it's part of the DI or not, and try to get from there. And in .NET 6, if it's not there, you throw exception or throw error. In this case, you say, okay, you throw error, say it cannot be null. Okay, and we don't have the service there. So that's how we implement. We have other option is just create a constructor here and say I have a weather serves parameter to my constructor and create a field, and it will be available for all the controllers. That's another possibility, but it will be available to all the actions. And sometimes not exactly what you, let's say you have a different service for different actions in your the same controller.
So the trade-off there, it's easier to kind of handle things if you do it with constructor injection, but then it's available to all of them. It's maybe slowing down your other. And if you do it via the from service, it's more like localized to the controller action, but then you have to handle the issue where it has a problem, the service isn't available.
Exactly. And when you have a unit test and you have a controller with 10 serves, then you just call a method, one of the actions that only use one, it's crazy. And when you have a specific for the action, it's easier to make this unit testable.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's how it works in VC in .NET 6. What we did for .NET 7 is now it's if your parameter type it's registered to the dependency injection control container, will infer the from service behavior. That means in .NET 7, both scenarios will work exactly the same. And that's a little bit controversial, as I said, because someone say, okay, it's not clear. I have a get operation and I have a complex type that comes from body. That makes sense because that's how things usually, because not clear that this service is from service. So, but it's available, and you can always disable this option in .NET 7. Let me show you. So we can go to your program.cs in .NET 7, and we will configure the API behavior option instead of MVC options. And you can do options.disable implicit from service parameters, and say, okay, I'd like to disable it. So now we are just exactly as the .NET 6 works.
Okay.
Okay. And one is
Zane's commenting here, and I feel the same. I'm so used to doing constructor injection, and it's nice to think about using the service properties, and this having this inferred makes it even nicer. So
yeah, that's great. It's great. When we have the unit tests, it's make it a lot of easier. And one small change that we made for the from service, as I said, if we have a from service, and if I remove the registration here, your app will have exception that says the service is not registered there. Now, I probably you ask when you want to this behavior, but that's the behavior that we decide to implement to be consistent across the framework. That now, if you have a nullable register, nullable service from service, that means it should be optional, and if it's not there, you'll be null. Actually, it should be something like that instead. So if the service is not registering the GI, we will now have a default value, and we can do something like, okay, if the service is null, okay, I'd like to get a default service from somewhere else, and call the method. If not, I will call the not registered service. Not registered service. Yeah, something like that. As I said, it's not as useful as the other features, but it's kind of maybe you have different services, and yeah, that's an option that we made available.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
And the last one, I don't know how many people heard about the menu API that we've been talk a lot here. I think we have a community stand-up that Stefan and Safra talk about minimal. I really recommend you to watch. That's great. So in minimal, I think I have a minimal application here. So I can do a simple API, HTTP API endpoint describing basically in one line. We don't need to create control or anything like that. And one thing that was added as a part of the minimal API, it's a distinction between MVC and minimal. So we cannot use the action results of controllers in minimal API. And until .NET 6, we cannot use the new minimal results in MVC. So here in minimal APIs, we can do something like that. Results.ok. That's very similar than something like that. And always cause confusion.
Yep. I did this exact thing more than once.
Yeah. So we decided to make it works. Of course, if you try to do results.ok here, results.ok, it will complain because it's not an action result. You need to change to IResult, but yeah, but it works. And the big difference, I'll show you an example. Let me go back in. This one is good. Let me go back here. This one doesn't matter. Double check if I not break anything. Yeah, let me just remove this. I think I can do without. So if I do my action results in .NET 6, so basically I'm calling this very common API MVC action controller that return OK. We can do something like OK result as well, or in this case OK object result. Oh, sorry. Okay, object result. So it's worked as the same, but let's use the controller based method. And when you call this API, you get I show the when you have all the JSON data. And one cool feature in MVC is the content negotiation. Right? Let's say in my controller, not as useful nowadays, but probably someone need to do a different serialization. Let's say in my case, adding XML serializer. So I'd like to my API accept JSON and XML as well. So what MVC does is just use a accept header and try to do the content negotiation. So if instead of applicate.json, I provide a text.xml and call the action result, we will get the beautiful XML serialized.
Yep.
That's how the action result works. Minimal API don't have a content negotiation, and you always produce JSON. And let's say if you're calling Minimal API, before I show you, let me show how it behave. Minimal API behave in .NET 6 when you hit an API that has something like that. And that was shocking when I first see this behavior, because my expectation, okay, since it's not supported yet, it should fail. But that's not how it works.
Just get JSON.
Yeah, you get a JSON, but instead of having in this case, the forecast, the list of forecasts, you deserialize the HP result, and you have the information instead of value, and you have the stats code and content type.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So it's very different nuance, but until you note the difference, you become crazy. So because of that, we decide we have a lot of discussion to support or not support, and if not support, we'll throw exception or have analyze it. So we end up to have decide to have total support for the IResults, the minimal results in MVC. So now if you have a .NET 6, 7 and call the same API, we have exactly the same as you have in action result. So I not do a deep dive in the minimal API, but you have a number of HP results in minimal API that are very compatible or very similar than the MVC action results. Like you have the OK HP results, you have the OK object result in MVC. They are semantically they are the same, but they behave completely different. Okay, so if I try to do the same trick in this endpoint that I said, instead of using the applicate.json, I'll say, okay, now I'd like to use a text.xml. We get a JSON. Just because since we are now using the minimal or IResult or HP result, we don't have any formatter from output formatter from MVC. So we are basically skipping all the step and doing what minimal you do for generate the output. Basically writing the JSON to the output.
Okay.
So I think that's the last feature that I like to show. I don't know if you have any questions for this one or any other question.
I think you answered the ones there. Is it so? If you did want to do content negotiation, you could manually write something in where like you're checking for accept headers and do.
Yeah.
Is there have you seen people asking for content negotiation in minimal, or is that kind of outside of the scope?
Yeah, I think it's also the scope, but I don't know if the plan right now is to add in content negotiation. I don't have full knowledge about the history or the planning, but
Mhm.
yeah, for now I don't see any issue or any work for in our team to add content negotiation to minimal, because in minimal, as I said, you have interface, and as part of the results you have the extensions, and you can write your own results class type. So
Okay.
in your case, you say, I would like to create an XML output, and you can create XML a result and do whatever you want. And as part of your minimal, we do some header validation and return a different HP result.
Okay.
That's how it works today. But I'm not, as I said, I'm not fully full knowledge. No, I have not full knowledge about the planning for the content organization for minimal.
Okay.
Yeah.
You shared an issue earlier that had kind of a list of all the things with the grow up story, et cetera. And I think, was it 33403? I wanted to share that. Yeah.
Yeah. 33403.
So I'll share that link in the chat. I guess the one other thing is just as people are following along, what's the best way to kind of keep up to date with this and to, you know, if they have other, like you said, you know, you're asking for feedback and how do things work and what do people need to be optional or, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, uh, right now, all those features are in the .NET 7 preview. So I know for sure a lot of few people will decide to use it in production. It's not recommended to use in production because it's still in preview.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd love to have some people trying to make user of this feature. And whenever we have some weird behavior or some idea or some improvement that say, okay, it's good, but could be better,
Mm-hmm.
I recommend or go to the issue itself or create a new one that our team will triage and say, okay, makes sense or not make sense. Let's make it a priority or not. Because as example in the new check that you mentioned early in the URL list,
Mm-hmm.
we are here to listen the community. It says, okay, it doesn't make any sense the change that we did. Okay, let's go back and decide something different or add an option to, as I said, TryParse it's a default. And if you say, okay, it's too break and it's affecting a lot of people, we can decide to add a new option that you'll be able to disable or even make it not default. It's always possible.
Yeah.
While we're in a preview.
That and that's there have been some good additions and enhancements to that over time to enable optional or experimental features or things.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, that way I'll just switch back to this, but this was the latest post on ASP.NET Core updates, and it shows how to go through and install it. I'm always running the latest previews locally, and it doesn't break my stuff anymore. I used to always be scared to install previews or need a virtual machine, but you can run side by side and you can try all this stuff out. So this is, example. Here's some of the stuff you were showing there. And then, like you said, there's the GitHub issue that I just shared in the chat as well. So, great. Wow. Well, I think that was a really helpful run through. It's good to see, the overall picture, the kind of grow up story, and then also kind of uniting the two things, because it's nice to see the improvements with minimal API and modernization, but it also then, like some of the things you were showing with like the OK results being slightly different, it's nice to have them all kind of fit together.
Yeah. And just it's a plan to not have anything from MVC in minimal. That's the I think, I don't know, I will not say never, but that's not a plan right now. Minimal is minimal, MVC, MVC. but for sure we'll share the experience and try to make both as consistent as possible.
Okay. Great. Okay. Well, I think we're in a good spot to wrap up. We have a Visual Studio Toolbox coming up at 11:30, talking about Docker containers, which will be good. And so, thanks a bunch, Bruno. We'll definitely want to have you back on. As get in touch with me as things continue to progress. And happy to see more.
Thank you for the opportunity, and let's try to make more calls here.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and stick around for VS Toolbox if you're interested in that, and see you later.